Today we have a crazy revenge story on a partner who stole savings meant for their kids. We'll get into that in a bit, but first, I gave a cheating ex a taste of her own medicine. The worst day of my life till this day remains the day I, 35-year-old male, caught my girlfriend Riley, 31-year-old female, now ex, cheating on me. Before then, I didn't know what it was like to be heartbroken. Whenever people talked about the pain being as close as possible to physical pain, I used to laugh at them. I thought they were making things up. Well, guess what? They weren't, and I got to experience it firsthand. I should have known that something like this was bound to happen, though. The place where you meet someone and their favorite spots to hang out should be one of the flags that determines a relationship. But I completely overlooked it. I met Riley at a club. She was the friend of my roommate, Chase. I had just passed the bar and Chase took me out to celebrate, but that wasn't the only thing he was taking me out for. We had been living together since after college, and while he was very active in the dating world, I rarely dated. Scratch that, I never dated. I was so busy with college and then law school that I never even gave any thought to the dating world. So we went to a club to celebrate, and there he told me his real intentions for bringing me there. He was setting me up with someone. At first, I was skeptical about the whole arrangement till I met Riley. Man, she was pretty, and her moves on the dance floor were just wild. I liked her immediately, and so we got talking. We had a lot of things in common, so by the end of the day, we were exchanging numbers and planning where to meet next time. I have to be honest, hanging out with Riley was really fun. She made me look at things from a new angle, a fresh perspective, if you will. I was grateful for having her around. And as my roommate planned, we started hanging out till I worked up the courage to ask her to be my girlfriend. Surprisingly, she said yes. Her answer was something I honestly didn't expect. Why? Because Riley was a 10 and I'm like a 5 at best. Why on earth would she go for me? It's something I asked myself countless times, and it's probably the reason behind my insecurities, which eventually led me to the truth of her cheating on me. The first 2 months of our relationship were great. That's what people call the honeymoon phase. We called each other a million times a day. We always wanted to be together whenever we could. 6 months in, I even got a place of my own so she could move in with me. That was a bad idea though, and we decided after a month that we needed to take things slow, so she moved out. Riley worked in an accounting firm. When we started dating, her schedule wasn't a problem. I knew the hours and I knew exactly when to call her. It was hectic then, but she still found a way to reach out for us to hang out. Everything was going well until 7 months in when I started to sense her pulling away. At first, I thought it was all in my head. I tried to write it off as the insecure part of me coming out to play. But the more I tried to ignore those feelings, the more it became pronounced. Then I decided to look at the issue rationally. I took a note of all the things we used to do before I started feeling that way. The phone calls, the dates, her coming around, all those things. Then I cross-referenced it with how we were currently. I noticed that she made more excuses than before. Whenever I asked if she wanted to hang out before, 90% of the time her answer was yes. Even when she couldn't, her reasons were usually solid and she'd find a way to make it up to me. But that changed. She started to give excuses about how hectic her work was and the fact that she needed her rest. At first, I tried giving her space because that was what a good boyfriend would do, right? But eventually, it got tiring. I worked too. I got employed at a law firm as soon as I passed the bar, and it has been hectic for me too. But you don't see me complaining about it. I tried to explain to her, but every time I tried, she always shot me down. It was always a fight with her. I wasn't being appreciative of her enough, I always complained, or I was being too annoying. She never tried to see my point of view. Eventually, I turned to my former roommate Chase and explained what was going on to him. The first time I did, he gave me the generic advice I'd gotten from everybody else. Try to be more appreciative of her, be more sensitive, give her some space. But none of them worked. Nothing I did for Riley ever seemed to be enough. The only time she'd even talk to me or be open to hanging out was when I sent her some money or bought her a gift. I have to be honest, it felt wrong to me. I mean, I don't have a problem with buying stuff for my girlfriend, but it felt like it was the price I was paying to get her attention. I didn't like it one bit. One time I even did an experiment to see what would happen if I didn't get her something she asked for. She literally didn't talk to me for like a week, and whenever I asked her what was wrong or if it was because I didn't get her the shoes, she'd say nothing was wrong and that she wasn't mad. And then she'd proceed to keep ignoring me. We were obviously not going to last. The relationship had gone its course, but I was still holding on for some reason. But soon enough, it all became clear to me. Riley was celebrating her 31st birthday, and I went to her apartment. She had invited some of her coworkers, and among them was a guy named Jacob, 33-year-old male. She introduced him as the head of their department, but the way they related with each other told me he was a lot more than that to her. They talked and laughed, and I could feel myself brewing with jealousy. She hadn't talked or laughed with me in that manner in a really long time, and it just pissed me off that she was doing it with another person. By the end of the day, I confronted her about the whole thing, and she stuck to the fact that he was her boss. Nothing more, and that they were just friends. But I didn't believe her one bit. So I talked to Chase, and he knew that something was wrong, but since I couldn't walk up to her and ask, I needed to do it discreetly. First, I took her out for a weekend vacation. We did all of her favorite things, and when it was night, we went out to a nearby club to get wasted. I made sure to not have any drinks myself because I had a mission to carry out later that night, and I had to be sober for it. Eventually, she got really wasted, and I had to drive her back to the hotel. When she was asleep, I picked up her phone. She used the same password for all her devices, so her phone was easy to get into. I wished it wasn't, because what I found on it wasn't something I was ready for. I went through their chats and realized that my intuition was right. She had been cheating on me. They were sexting and sending photos to each other. The worst part of it all was the fact that I went through their chats from the beginning and realized that she was the one who initiated it. He only moved that way because she did it first. The rest of the chats showed things like their decision to meet up and hotel reservations. I was distraught. That was the worst thing that had ever happened to me, and the crazy part was that I had the feeling that something like that might happen. I always thought that I wasn't good enough for Riley, and the only thing that eased my mind a little bit was the reassurance she gave to me. But eventually, going through her phone made me realize that it was all a lie. I wanted to cry. Heck, I wanted to smash stuff. But I didn't want to tip her off to the fact that I knew of her extracurricular activities. At least not until I figured out a way to get back at her. And so, while I thought of a plan, I started to pull away. The pulling away wasn't part of the plan. I just couldn't stand being with her, knowing that she was sleeping with someone else at the side. I guess she noticed because she started to put more effort into the relationship. She would call more and visit and try to hang out with me. I guess the old me would have loved all that stuff, but the new me was aware of her cheating. Her efforts meant nothing. I started to go out more, and this was when I met my current girlfriend, Lana, 27-year-old female. It was at a basketball game and we got talking. We realized that we had a lot in common, and so we exchanged numbers and made plans to hang out. Chase knew what happened every step of the way, and when I told him about Lana, he made me realize that it was the perfect revenge. If Riley knew that I was seeing someone else, she would lose it. So I got to work. I got even more distant from Riley, canceling dates and hangouts. I don't even bother making up good excuses. The plan was to make her realize that I was actually pulling away. I knew what it did to me when I was in her shoes, how I overthought the fact that I wasn't good enough for her and what I might be doing wrong. She started acting as crazy as I was back then, calling at odd hours of the day or night and showing up at my place to cook dinner. It was hilarious. By this time, Lana and I were already going strong, but we weren't official yet. I had told her about Riley, how she hurt me and my plan to make her pay. It took some convincing, but she finally went with it. My torturing Riley went on for almost 2 months before I moved on to the grand finale, making her catch me in bed with Lana. This part was pretty easy. We always hung out on Friday after work, but that day, I told her my brothers were coming into town and I wouldn't be available. She asked if she could visit, and I turned her down. Next, I asked Chase to call her on that Friday to put me on the phone. Her response, as expected, was that she wasn't with me and that I was hanging out with my brothers. There, Chase would tell her that I didn't have brothers. My ex was coming to town, and I had told him that the three of us were hanging out. As expected, she got pissed and got to my place hoping to catch me in the act. When we heard her coming, we pretended to be going at it to get her really pissed. When she burst into the room and started to yell, I merely picked up my phone and showed her the screenshots of the chats I'd taken months ago. That shut her right up. Even before I said it was over, she started to beg, saying it happened a long time ago and she had ended it. I wasn't interested in all that, and I announced to her that Lana and I were dating. The look of shock and pain in her eyes was a welcome sight. I was way past feeling bad about how she was going to take it, and I enjoyed every moment of her misery. So I'd kind of like to know the common sentiment of people. Do you think what OP did here was fair game, letting this go on for months? Or is OP just as bad, if not worse, than their cheating ex by allowing this all to just go on? And although they kind of knew it was over and what was going on behind their back with their partner, still kind of cheating themselves? I mean, OP kept it secret. It's still technically cheating, right? Even if OP considered things over. Also, hi, I'm Steven, and if you guys enjoy crazy stories of revenge, it would be amazing if you left a like or left a review if you're listening to my podcast. That said, our next story is Disgusting Sleepout Owner Doesn't Deserve Another Tenant. Hello guys, my name is Mary, and this is how I dealt with a sleepout owner I once lived with while trying to get a degree in the university. Moving to the city for my studies was a big step. I left behind my small hometown, my family, and everything I knew. Thankfully, my brother, he was more like a distant cousin, but he was my brother all the same, lived in the city, so I temporarily stayed with him, his wife, and their young child. It was a bit cramped, but it was nice to have family around. The deal was that I would stay with them until they had a second child, as they would obviously need as much space as required to take care of the child. I thought I still had a long time, 2 years at the most, and I'd laid out a plan as to how I would have saved enough to move into my own space. However, my sister-in-law's second pregnancy came quicker than anyone expected. Suddenly, the urgency to find my own place hit hard. I knew I couldn't stay with them much longer. They needed the space for the new baby. I had to find somewhere affordable and close to my university, and I had to find it fast. I spent hours online scrolling through countless listings for small apartments and rooms. Most of them were way out of my budget. Then I stumbled upon a post on Facebook for a backyard sleepout. It seemed perfect, affordable, close to my university, and the photos made it look cozy enough. Without giving it much thought, I decided to move in. I didn't have time to go inspect the place or meet the owners. I figured it would be fine, and the relief of finding something so quickly clouded my judgment. I packed up my things, said goodbye to my brother and his family, and headed to my new home, hoping it would be a good place to focus on my studies. Little did I know, I was walking into a nightmare. When I arrived at the backyard sleepout with my belongings, I was a bit happy. This was because, though the online photos showed a cozy little space, and I'd hoped it would just be what I needed to focus on my studies, it still seemed as though those who put the pictures up may have exaggerated how livable it was. It was obvious that the pictures that were uploaded must have been taken a while ago, and the room wasn't well cared for. Anyway, I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room was small but had a certain charm to it. The bed looked comfortable, and there was a small desk where I could work. This first impression, though not satisfactory, was good enough for me, and I felt a sense of hope. I unpacked my bags, arranging my books and clothes. The thought of having my own space, away from the bustling household of my brother and his growing family, was comforting. I was eager to settle in and start this new chapter of my life. Little did I know, the initial relief was only temporary. The first time I walked into the main house to use the bathroom, I was shocked. The place was a hoarder's paradise. There were piles of stuff everywhere, old newspapers, clothes, toys, and who knows what else. The kitchen was the worst, with dirty dishes stacked high and food scraps littering the counters. The bathroom wasn't any better. It was grimy, and I could barely stand to be in there long enough to use it. I felt uneasy and a bit nauseous. Despite the mess, I tried to stay optimistic. I reminded myself that the sleepout was my main space, and I wouldn't need to spend much time in the main house. I hoped I could make it work, but deep down, I knew it would be a challenge. It didn't take long to discover the first major issue: the shower. On my first morning, I turned the knob, expecting a normal warm shower. Instead, scalding hot water gushed out. I yelped and jumped back, narrowly avoiding burns. No matter how much I fiddled with the handle, the temperature wouldn't lower. It was either scalding hot or off. After a few days of this, I gave up and started using the hidden shower at the university I was schooling. It was inconvenient and embarrassing to sneak into the campus gym just to clean up, but I had no choice. The discomfort was starting to affect my mood, but I kept telling myself it was only temporary. Another problem soon emerged: the couple's child. She was adorable but constantly underfoot. Every time I tried to study or relax, she was there, demanding attention. Her mother didn't help the situation. Instead of managing her child, she made passive-aggressive comments directed at me. "Maybe you should tell her to leave you alone," she'd say, as if it were my responsibility. I tried to avoid the child by locking myself in the sleepout or spending more time away, but it wasn't always possible. The situation was stressful and the mother's behavior only made it worse. I felt trapped in a place where I couldn't find peace or privacy. The kitchen was always a disaster. Dirty dishes piled up and food scraps covered the counters. Preparing food became a near impossible task. I ended up eating snacks most of the time, which wasn't healthy or satisfying. Doing laundry was another ordeal. The washing machine was in the filthy kitchen, and every time I tried to use it, the mother would get irritated. "I'll do your laundry," she offered, but I always refused. The bathroom situation was equally dire. With the main house bathroom often unusable or off limits, I ended up using a bucket for bathroom needs. I sanitized myself with wipes and emptied the bucket discreetly outside early in the morning or late at night. It was humiliating, but I had no other choice. As if the living situations weren't bad enough, the mother's behavior became increasingly passive-aggressive. She would give me icy glares and make snide comments under her breath. Her hostility was palpable. One day, in a desperate attempt to improve the situation, I tried washing the mountain of dirty dishes in the kitchen. Instead of being grateful, she confronted me angrily. "I'm going to ask you to not ever do my dishes again," she snapped. Her reaction was baffling and frustrating. I was just trying to help, but it seemed nothing I did could please her. The tension in the house grew thicker each day. The mother's unpredictable moods and passive-aggressive actions made the environment even more toxic. It was a constant battle to stay calm and avoid conflict. Adding to the misery were the frequent power outages in the sleepout. The electrical wiring was clearly subpar, and even plugging in one too many small appliances would trip the main power in the house. The couple blamed me every time it happened. The power supply issue reached a boiling point one evening. I had plugged in my laptop to charge, only to have the power trip again. Frustrated, I went into the main house to reset the breaker. The mother was waiting for me, her face twisted with anger. "If you keep doing this, we've got a problem," she shouted. Her words stung, and I felt my patience snap. "I know you have a problem," I retorted, my voice shaking with pent-up frustration. It was clear we were at the breaking point. The environment had become intolerable, and the constant hostility was taking a toll on my mental health. I couldn't stay there any longer. I needed to find a new place, and I needed to do it urgently. The realization was both daunting and a relief. I spent the next few days searching for a new place to stay. It wasn't easy, but I finally found a room in a nearby hostel. It wasn't perfect, but it offered a chance to escape the toxic environment of the sleepout. I packed my belongings quickly and quietly, not wanting another confrontation with the mother. Leaving the sleepout without saying goodbye was a bit petty, but was needed. I needed her to know that I wasn't pleased with the whole situation. Perhaps she might try to call me back to negotiate or anything at all. An apology, perhaps, but nothing came from her. It was then I began to feel like all she did might have been deliberate. It even felt like a repeated routine. Perhaps she did it so each tenant could leave before their rents expired out so she could have the place ready for another unsuspecting and unfortunate prospective tenant. Before leaving the sleepout for good, I took the time to document the horrible conditions the building was in. I snapped photos of the kitchen piled high with dirty dishes, the cluttered and grimy bathroom, and the overall chaos of the main house. Each photo captured the reality of living there, an unlivable mess that no one should have to endure. I made a plan to warn future tenants about the nightmare I had experienced. That would be my act of revenge against her, and I'd also be making sure no one else would fall into the same trap. Just as I had assumed, without reaching out to know why I decided to move out, the woman decides it's time she rents out the sleep out to someone else while I was still supposed to be renting it out. How did I know? I saw the same advert I'd seen on Facebook again. The thought of someone else suffering through what I did fueled my plans for revenge. I started messaging potential tenants, sharing my story and backing it up with the photos I'd taken. I detailed the filthy living conditions, the hostile environment, and the power issues that had damaged my iMac. Each time I received a response, I felt a sense of satisfaction. Warning others and preventing them from making the same mistake became my mission. The mother quickly caught on and tried to evade me by changing her Facebook name and tweaking her advertisements, but I was relentless. For a whole year, I kept an eye on any post she made about the sleep out. Whenever I saw a new ad, I would swoop in and contact potential tenants, making sure they knew the truth. My persistence paid off. No one else moved into that awful place while I was watching. The thought of protecting others from such a terrible living situation gave me a sense of justice and closure. The ordeal was behind me, but the revenge was sweet and satisfying. Looking back on the ordeal, I saw how much I'd gone through and learned. Living in the sleep out had been a nightmare, but getting revenge brought me a sense of justice. Knowing that I stopped others from suffering in those awful conditions made me very happy. Each time I warned a potential tenant, it felt like a small victory against the filth and hostility I faced. Living in the hostel, I appreciated the simple things more. Cleanliness, peace, and no passive-aggressive behavior made a huge difference. I could finally relax and focus on what I came to the city for, my studies. The hostel wasn't fancy, but it felt like a sanctuary compared to the sleep out. With the nightmare behind me, I turned my full attention back to my studies. The hostel offered a stable and peaceful environment where I could work without constant interruptions or stress. The friendly atmosphere and cleanliness helped me feel normal and focused again. The experience at the sleep out was something I would never forget, but it was now in the past. I had moved on, both physically and mentally. The lessons I learned about standing up for myself and seeking justice stayed with me, but the daily stress and anxiety were gone. I had found my peace and my future again. I mean, OP did get their revenge and whatnot and did hit them in the wallet, but it still kinda hit OP in the wallet. I don't know how much they paid for this. I surely hope in OP situation it wasn't something they kind of leaped for, thinking the experience they would get there would be a lot better than, for example, what they ended up with in the hostel. OP didn't really clarify on it, but financially I hope it wasn't too bad for them. Our next story is, my husband stole our twins' money to impress his ex-girlfriend. My husband decided to stoop so low as stealing from his children to impress the lady who left him without any care in the world. She was the first thing we talked about when we first met 10 years ago. He talked about how his ex-girlfriend Martha left him because he, according to her, could not cater for her needs anymore. I came in for a doctor's appointment and just found it odd how the grown man next to me was crying, not the loud audible ones. He was sort of brooding, and I turned to see tears falling from his face. Out of concern, I politely asked him if he was fine, and of course, he wasn't. He was crying over his ex-girlfriend who suddenly just left him. At first, I thought he meant she died, but as he kept explaining how chaotic she was, yet he found a reason to stay out of love, I got to understand they were in some sort of toxic relationship. Although I said nothing, we ended up exchanging numbers, and the next week, he called me asking us to meet up for a date. I knew I should have said no, but it had been a while since I got dressed and went out on a date. So what was a little harmless fun among two strangers? I met up with him and he apologized for crying the last time we met. He made it clear so many times during dinner that he was very much over his ex-girlfriend. I knew that was a lie, and I also knew he needed time to get over her, so I advised him to give it time before seeking any form of companionship. It ended up being a long night filled with talk about exes with a stranger, and we parted ways on a good note. I expected that to be the last I saw of him, but by the end of the next month, I saw him sitting in the same waiting room as last month. He had admitted he was there to see me, and this time he was more honest about his feelings. He said he was still in the process of trying to get over his ex-girlfriend, and he didn't want to miss the opportunity of having a potentially great relationship because he was stuck in the past, so we should go out. His honesty was refreshing. I hated liars, and the fact that he was honest about his feelings was something I appreciated so much, I agreed to go out with him. We went out a couple of times where he later told me the full story of how his ex-girlfriend had broken up with him the day I found him crying at my doctor's appointment, and he just found out himself there out of confusion. She really did a number on him, and I was aware of that, but I thought maybe he would gradually get over her if we continued dating. We began something that led to a serious relationship. One I was happy with and thought he had gotten over the woman who broke his heart, because by the end of the next year, this man was on his knees proposing and making promises on how I would never regret getting married to him. I didn't hesitate to say yes. He had been nothing but good to me during our courting days, so I was more than happy to become his wife. We had one of those spontaneous weddings and came back home to tell my parents. My mom was furious. I'm guessing that's why she never liked my husband. I told them it was just one of those decisions we made in the spur of the moment and we were happy, but after a while she came to terms with it. My dad had always been an easygoing person. He just wished me all the best and treated my husband kindly. Our twins came much later in our relationship. This was because we had failed rounds of IVF and lots of doctor's appointments. I had initially known before I'd gotten married that my chances of getting pregnant was slim, so I had frozen some eggs. I never told my husband about my situation because I was always scared he would leave. But even after he found out, he was very supportive in every step of the way. He worked as an architect in a private company while I was a journalist. I earned more than him in terms of money, but money was never an issue between us. If I was being honest, I always thought our marriage would eventually end over my inability to have a child, that he would grow tired and end up doing something stupid. I also wanted kids. I always saw kids in my future and was excited at the prospect of having kids. After several failed rounds of painful IVF, one finally stuck and I was so excited. I told my husband we needed to do something to celebrate, so I opened a certain account with the intention of saving up for my kid. I never even expected them to be twins. I just wanted to have a child, but I ended up being blessed with 2 little boys. This just made me even more happier. My husband and I decided to keep the account a savings account so we could only have access to it whenever we were desperately in need of the money or when we decided to give our children access to it. This was about 5 years into our marriage. We had just given birth to the twins. I was thinking of their future and was so emotional, so I split the money in my account into 2 and kept one half aside for the kids in their account. Soon, my hands became full dealing with 2 kids while my husband spent more time at work. I wasn't even complaining because I wanted kids no matter how much work they were. I loved having them around. I couldn't say the same for my husband. He wasn't always as excited as I was over taking care of them. I never forced him to do anything out of the ordinary, just him changing their diapers or grabbing their feeding bottle would have him complaining endlessly about how kids were lots of work and quite messy. At first, I thought I was being too hard and overthinking things, but it became clear this was an issue. He had an issue with the boys, and I had a talk with him about it. My husband kept saying things were fine before they entered the picture, and all my attention drifted to our 1-year-old. It sounded absurd that I had to explain to my grown butt of a husband that children came first because they needed guidance, and it was up to us to guide them, so this was something he should have been prepared for when we both agreed to have kids. I was also having a hard time dealing with the changes that came with children. At work, I was struggling to be as efficient as I used to be, and my work was all about efficiency. I had to make sure I ended the day just in time to pick up the kids from daycare because my husband didn't bother with this stuff. It was like he became an entirely different person after the twins came. As opposed to me being scared of him leaving before they came into the picture, I decided we had enough and booked us a therapy session. He was also against that, but eventually came to terms with it. It was a lot. My husband had a lot to say. It was as if he held a grudge against the twins, and after 3 sessions, the therapist came to the conclusion that I needed to spend more time with my husband because he was feeling neglected. According to her, we all have different reactions to change, and because of this big change that came into our lives after 5 years of normalcy to him, it must have affected our marriage dynamics. We decided to do the things we always did regularly before the kids came into the picture, but it was stressful. I was once this energetic person who could tour around the city to find the latest going on, and documenting it as a part of my job. And my husband always enjoyed these sessions because we made it fun, but most days all I wanted to do after a long day was sleep. I tried my best to be as spontaneous as I used to be, but I guess I'd also changed, and my husband needed to come to terms with that. If after 7 years a person isn't entitled to some changes, I don't know if that was normal thinking. I also pointed out the fact that my husband wasn't the same person he used to be when I met him, and I was fine with that. He needed to get on board with his new life, and I thought we reached some sort of understanding because he was finally acting fine. He was more patient with the twins who had grown a little older and knew their father, and everything was fine for 2 years. Then the lies started. I knew my husband went on more work trips than usual, but according to him, they landed a big gig out of the country and he needed to be a part of the team. And then a few months later, he said a new company was poaching him and he was thinking of accepting their offer. The pay was better and it was sort of a promotion kind of thing. I was against him leaving the company he worked for over 12 years because he'd invested so much time and energy, and I knew his boss, some of his colleagues, they were like a big family, so it didn't make sense, but my husband's mind was made up. I had to be supportive because I didn't want to come across as controlling. My husband was always keeping me updated about the latest that happened in his workplace, how he was welcomed and how he owned his own office. I kept saying I wanted to come over and see what the office was like, but he was always finding one excuse or the other. I was on my way to work when I saw his former boss walking into a coffee shop and decided to say hi. He looked at me surprisingly and kept apologizing over the whole matter with my husband, and I told him it was nothing to apologize over. If anything, I should be the one apologizing, and he looked at me like I was crazy. This was when I knew we were both talking about two different things entirely. He ended up explaining to me that my husband was fired from work because he stole a certain amount of money from the company and refused to refund it. I kept saying no. I didn't want to believe this man had been lying to me for the past 6 months because it had been over 6 months. Then his boss asked me if I noticed anything different about him, and I kept thinking back to all the endless trips. Where had the money been coming from if he had been fired? I went to the bank and asked for my statement. The kid's account was dormant, so I had no idea my husband wired a certain amount of money to his account till I went to the bank, and nothing prepared me for all this in one day. I found out my husband had been taking money from our kids' savings and was owing the company he worked for. I made sure to dig deeper into his laptop and computer. Everything was connected. Messages from Martha came up, the ones that were supposed to be hidden. I saw he had been spending time with his ex-girlfriend, who was also married to a millionaire, of course, and this had been going on for more than a year. Even when I thought my husband and I were doing fine, he was busy talking to his ex-girlfriend who left him because he couldn't afford her lifestyle, and now he was jobless again, spending our kids' money on her. I didn't get that. I tracked down Martha's house and showed everything to her husband. He wasn't shocked. He said he wasn't the first of many. He was filing for a divorce apparently, while I was left to deal with my husband, and of course, he was out on a business trip. He came back not too long ago and I just haven't been able to look at him the same way. I don't think we can get past this because now Martha's broken up with him and wants to focus on fixing her marriage, while I have a heartbroken man who knows I'm aware of his infidelity and keeps waiting for me to do something. I finally packed the last of my bags last night. The kids and I would be staying at my parents' house while my husband contemplates his life priorities. My mom has been urging me over the phone to get a divorce, but I'm still in the process of thinking what's best for me and my kids. I think OP definitely has the right idea, getting them and the kids away from this guy, definitely locking down that kid's account, maybe even considering some kind of legal action? I mean, I don't know how far OP truly wants to go with this, if they consider leaving them and just taking the kids' punishment enough. Maybe with a lot of time and proof, they can be considered to be incorporated in the kids' lives again, but even then, it didn't really seem like they were all that interested to start with. Just a sad situation all around. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. Now, if you want to hear another absolutely crazy revenge story, check out that video on the left. Or if you missed my latest video, check out that video on the right. That said, I'll see you all next time with some more stories.